Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. As much, it's really just the topic of the moment in college sports, and that is the present and future and the never-ending realignment that is coming specifically with the Big 12 and the Pac-12. And on Friday's show, if you listened, we did, and I got some great feedback, so thank you to all you guys and girls who reached out to me. But we did kind of a 30,000-foot view of, okay, where are we right now? The Big 12 has taken Colorado. They are now at 13 schools. Do they go to 14 schools? Do they go to 16 schools? Who would it be? We talked about individual schools like UConn, like Arizona. What would be next for Oregon and Washington, who seem to be tied at the hip? And so on Friday, we did that big recap. But I do believe that over the weekend, the winds have started to shift a little bit. Things are starting to clarify a little bit. And so I kind of want to do an update. And I don't plan on doing Big 12, Pac-12 updates every single episode of this show, but it remains the biggest story in sports, and it remains an ever ongoing thing. And as I get new information, I'm going to share it. So let's start with what we know, what we learned over the weekend. I spent a bunch of time on the phone with contacts and people that I know in the business, and other reports have come out, whatever. But let's get into what we've learned over the last couple of days since Friday's show. And I'd start by saying this, is that before we can even talk about any individual schools, individual teams, we need to answer the fundamental baseline question of this. Is the Big 12 going to stay at 13? They're certainly not. So will they go to 14, or will they go to 16 and match the same number of schools as the Big 10 and the SEC will have next year? Remember, the Big 12 will be at 14 this year with Texas and Oklahoma. They leave, Colorado comes in. But the 14 versus 16 debate is very important for one simple reason, right? If it's 14, it means that there's a lot of schools angling for one spot in the Big 12, and then everybody else is kind of SOL, if you know what that means. If it's 16, though, it changes the dynamic. Then you can take a couple Pac-12 schools and a group of five like UConn. UConn's not really a group of five. They are in football. You can take the three corner schools, Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah. You can take Arizona, Washington, and Oregon if the opportunity presented itself and Oregon and Washington were interested. And so I bring it up because 14 versus 16 changes everything. 14 is one school, whatever. 16 probably means multiple Pac-12 schools are out, and the Pac-12 is now hemorrhaging team after team after team after team, and there might not be a future for that league as well. Well, I guess if you're looking for any sort of silver lining for the Pac-12, it does appear as though all accounts this weekend, the Big 12 is going to stay at 14 schools. And I don't know that this is totally surprising because, and by the way, when I say 14, what I mean is they're taking Colorado, they're going to add one more, so that will be staying at the 14 that they have this year, just will be a different set of schools. But to me, ultimately, this isn't very surprising because of something that the commissioner himself, Brett Yormark, said a few weeks ago. If you remember, at Big 12 Media Days, Brett Yormark, he did the main podium interview where he said, look, we're happy with our 12, but we'll continue to evaluate, and it's up to the board and blah, 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 and this and that. But then he did a separate interview with On3 Sports, and I referenced this on this show, and I tweeted about it on this show. And what I said at the time was Brett Yormark was asked a very specific question, and I don't know if he wanted it framed this way. Sometimes I'll tell you is that sometimes a savvy person will lead an interviewer into a question. But he was asked specifically about getting back to 14 teams post Texas and Oklahoma. And he said point blank, I will be disappointed if we are not back at 14 schools within the next year or two. So it wasn't 16. It wasn't expansion. It was specifically 14 schools. And so to me, that was always kind of the barometer. I thought you could get to 16, But when he said 14, that always stayed in the back of my mind as there must be something here. There must be a reason that he specifically answered that question this specific way. So if it is 14, what I will also add is this. It appears as though right now, this second, there is a team that is in the driver's seat to get that 14th spot. And it's one of two that I talked about on Friday's show. Bluntly, on Friday's show, I said both UConn and Arizona feel good about the position that they're in. Now, at that time, I think I was more open to the idea of the Big 12 going to 16, not 14. But the team that I believe, the school that I believe that is set to get that 14th opportunity, and again, you can't go until you get the invite, I do think it's Arizona, though. And so what has happened, what has changed, but more specifically, what is it about Arizona that they will be the next school? To me, it is almost a perfect, why I think it's Arizona, I guess to say it like this, why I think it's Arizona. It fits the criteria that both Brett Yormark, the commissioner, wants, but also the conference presidents as well. We know from Brett Yormark's perspective, what he wants is to build a coast-to-coast basketball juggernaut. We've talked about it many times. He believes that if you can build the best basketball conference in America, if you can include some of the biggest brands in America, it means that you cannot be excluded from any future realignment of college sports. So if the Big 12, Big 10 and the SEC at some point in the next 20, 30, 10, 5, 2 years decide they want to break off, well, you can't play major college sports without Kansas and all these basketball powers. And so that has been Brett Yormark's goal. But I also think it appeases the conference president's goals as well. Remember, the conference presidents by nature, they're not sports people. They're not basketball people. They're not football people either. And school presidents, in many cases, aren't athletic people at all. Brett Yormark has this 20-year vision of what he wants the Big 12 to be, playing games in Mexico. They just did a clinic at Rucker Park for basketball because they clearly want to make New York a priority and a hub for the Big 12. The presidents don't care about that. They're running major universities, and they just want to know what stabilizes us the best. And so Arizona, coming from a Power 5 conference in a pseudo-contiguous state, obviously they're kind of in the Big 12 footprint. Obviously they're a border state of Colorado, who's joining the league, of Utah, which has BYU, which is in the Big 12. Arizona geographically makes sense. Arizona basketball fits the narrative, but also they play Power 5 football as well. And this is an important component for a reason that we talked about when we talked about Colorado last week. And this is something I don't think enough people are talking about, okay? So when Colorado officially accepted the invite to the Big 12, there is a very interesting clause in the contracts, the TV contracts that the Big 12 has signed. That clause states explicitly that the Big 12, if they are to add Power 5 teams and Power 5 programs, those schools then automatically get a full TV share. So why is that important? Colorado joins. They get the full 30 plus million, 31 million and change. That's great for Colorado. There's no waiting period. There's no buyout, which is important. And I know I'm getting nerdy here, but this is important stuff. For Colorado, you look at it, they get the full 31 million. There's no buyout. There's no exit fee from the Pac-12. They're free and clear. From the Pac-12's perspective, they don't have to help subsidize Colorado as they transition from another league. The league, as we know it, the Pac-12, is over in 2024. And so it's the same with Arizona. Arizona can come in. They can break off clean from the Pac-12. There's no exit fees. There's no this. There's no giving them a partial share as they get acclimated to the league. Those are important things to the school presidents, and so it all makes sense. From Arizona's perspective, I think it obviously goes without saying it's a no-brainer. More TV money, certainly more stability. And for Arizona, a basketball power, you're now aligning yourself with the best basketball league in America. And I know Arizona football is on the way up. Jed Fish, I'm not trying to disrespect what he's doing, but Arizona basketball, if they stay behind in the Pac-12, what are you staying behind for? UCLA's gone. USC's gone. Nobody else is very good. So for Arizona, it fits too perfectly, but then it's obviously mostly just about stability and being able to move forward. There's been differing conversations about Arizona State. I'll stick with what I said on Friday. I think in a perfect world, Arizona would like Arizona State to come with them. I think all the power players in that state would like those two schools to stay aligned. But Arizona's going to do what's best for Arizona. They're not waiting around for Arizona State. And I don't know Arizona State's going to get an invite ever. And even if they are, I don't know if they're going to accept it ever for all the reasons we talked about on Friday. From the UConn perspective, listen, I'll say this bluntly on Friday's show, and I got to own it. I said that UConn, the people that I talked to there, listen, I've been talking to people everywhere, right? And so the people I talked to at UConn, and I don't think it was a place of arrogance or misinformation, I think they felt very good after the Colorado news. I don't think they were concerned about not having a seat at the table. I do think it's changed a little bit over the past 48 to 72 hours since then. From the UConn perspective, listen, by the way, for the record, I don't think UConn's done anything wrong. Everybody, there's a big thing on social media about UConn football, this and that. And it's not because I like Jim Mora and I've had him on the show and I think he's really good at what he does. But UConn, there is a history. You put them in a power conference with power resources. They sell out their stadium. They win. They go to big bowl games. They win bowl games. Like this is a team that can compete in a power conference. So I think UConn's done everything right. They've upgraded all the facilities, new baseball stadium, softball. This is all good stuff. But from UConn's perspective, what this simply comes down to, in my opinion, is a disagreement between Brett Yormark, the commissioner, and the school presidents, as we just talked about with Arizona. I don't think there's any doubt that if it was up to Brett Yormark unilaterally, if he just made all the decision, if he just rubber stamped everything, boom, 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 UConn would be probably already have an invite and have already accepted. The problem becomes, from UConn's perspective, is what Brett Yormark wants isn't what the school presidents necessarily want. Brett Yormark, remember, this is a guy, we've talked about it a million times, so I'll be quick here. But Northeast ties, he wants a pipeline to New York City. He believes New York City is the major media market, and he wants a coast-to-coast league that is a power, specifically in basketball. And I also think he believes in what UConn football is capable of, what UConn's athletic department is capable of. Baseball program's great. Olympic sports are great, etc. But again, it goes back to what I said with the school presidents. From the UConn perspective, they're not a Power 5, so they won't automatically be just phased into this TV contract the way that an Arizona could, or anybody from a Power 5 conference. And then beyond that, UConn does have a buyout of $30+ million from the Big East if they decide to leave. So UConn just, it's the old Facebook status. It's complicated. It's just more complicated with UConn. It's cleaner with Arizona. Arizona plays power conference football. And so, as I said, right now, Arizona is in the driver's seat. And I don't think it's anything UConn's done wrong. I just think it's a tough deal of convincing the school presidents. And by the way, I'd say this. I think it's been a tough conversation from the beginning. I can tell you, just talking to people behind the scenes, all corners of the country. Remember, I grew up in Connecticut, but I live in Pac-12 country. So I got a network everywhere. And I think most people felt like UConn was at the front of the line. It was going to be Colorado. That was what the school presidents wanted. It was going to be UConn. That was what Brett Yormark wanted. And then as the summer has gone on, as the league presidents had their meetings in West Virginia in late May, the paradigm started to shift. But again, even after Colorado, I think most people thought Brett Yormark was going to be able to push this through. And now it's becoming a bit more challenging. And from UConn's perspective, again, I don't think they did anything wrong. Facilities are where they need to be. Football's on the rise. And I'll say this too, like for anybody that, I've had a call, Torres, you were just saying it because of this or because of that. No. One, UConn is by any definition a Power 5 program. They're not in a Power 5 conference. They operate like a Power 5 program. Elite facilities, elite coaches, well paid. But I also believe that they were acting all offseason like a program, and they have been acting the last couple years like a program that expected to find itself in the Power 5 going forward. Does UConn give Dan Hurley a contract extension worth $6 million a year if they really, truly believe they're staying in the Big East long term? Big East TV payout, according to Pete Thable, I think is somewhere in the neighborhood of like $4 to $5 million. So you're going to pay your basketball coach $6 million, only making $4 million in TV revenue. No, UConn has been operating as though they are expecting to get into a power league. I'd mention this too, by the way. Just so it's clear, Dan Hurley deserves every penny he gets. So I hope that doesn't sound like I think it was a bad contract. It was a great contract. You got to pay a national championship coach, national championship coaching money. That's what they did. But they've been operating as though they're expecting to get into a Power 5. And right now, things are a little bit more kind of fluid than I think they were even 72 hours ago, 96 hours ago, when Colorado announced that they were leaving. I think from everywhere else, I don't think much else really has changed. I gave the Arizona State thing. Anybody who thinks that Arizona is going to stay back to help Arizona State, in a perfect world, I think they'd like to, but I don't think they're going to. Utah might be the biggest loser here. BYU's kind of got that market cornered. I don't think BYU's keen on bringing in Utah. Utah, I don't think is keen on following BYU either. Oregon and Washington, they're kind of doing their own thing. Maybe some point down the road, the Big Ten gets interested. But I have said from the day that USC and UCLA left, if the Big Ten wanted anybody else from the Pac-12, they would have taken them. The fact that they didn't, I don't think changes anything. Now, maybe, I don't know, new commissioner, things change. I don't know. I still can't totally figure out what's going on with Oregon and Washington. I will say this, though. Pac-12 can keep Oregon, Washington, and Utah. That's not a terrible football conference, but there's just a lot going on. Finally, I want to say one last thing, because I will say this, is I've seen a lot of conversation about the missteps of the Pac-12. And it feels like the last 2 weeks, and really with the Colorado news, Colorado feels like the tip of the iceberg that's going to lead to other schools leaving. With Colorado, or with the Pac-12, I've seen a lot of like, remember when Larry Scott could have gotten Oklahoma and Texas and screwed that up? And like, I know at this moment, it's easy to blame Larry Scott, the former commissioner. You know where I think the Pac-12 really screwed up? You know where I think they dug their own grave? It was the day after Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12 for the SEC, and the Big 12 was absolutely on the brink. And if you remember at that point, there was talk of the Pac-12 adding teams, and the Pac-12 basically said, we're good. And whether it was because the commissioner couldn't see the forest through the trees, couldn't understand the bigger picture of college sports, or that he couldn't convince his presidents to get on board, that to me was the day that the Pac-12 unofficially died. Because from there, you opened yourself up with 2 years at that point left on a TV deal. You open yourself up for the Big 12 to regain. Then, of course, the Big 12 gets its TV deal done. And then you end up in a scenario, there's no TV money to go around. USC and UCLA leave. And this all could have been avoided if you could have convinced your presidents, hey, take an Oklahoma State, take a TCU, take Kansas and Kansas State. Do what you have to do to survive and put the dagger in the Big 12 once and for all. So everyone's talking about, remember when Texas and Oklahoma could have come to the Pac-12? Forget that. The Pac-12 wrote its own obituary the day that they could not convince the presidents, or they decided not to expand in the wake of Texas and Oklahoma leaving for the Big 12.